There's some big threat out there, and you are gonna help me stop it.
Wait, us?
Yeah, you. Why, you got someplace to be?
I love that guy.
I really want to start with a huge congratulations. You fucking nailed this. Just
thanks.
What does it mean to you? Because you've put in a lot of time on this. I believe it's you're at Rotten Tomatoes 88% after 110 reviews. That is a great score for a Marvel movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I was just in this room finishing it about 2.5 weeks ago, so it's weird to all of a sudden have it out there, and it's much nicer with you guys in the room watching it than alone, having not slept, doing a QC check. So this is much more fun.
Listen, you haven't done anything of this scale before, so how the hell did you land this material?
As in, like, get the job? Like,
yeah,
why did they trust me? That's a huge mistake.
No. They. I mean, Feige and whoever made the decision to hire you obviously was incredibly smart. My question is, like, did you go in with a pitch? Did you do a general meeting? Like, how did you actually land it?
I had met with them about different things over the years, and then so John Watts was my roommate in college. He directs the Spider-Man movies, and I had done second unit on like the LA portion of Homecoming. So I met them through that, and it's only a couple weeks. And then like this email crossed my desk, and it was Thunderbolts starring Florence Pugh and the rest of this cast. And then I think it was a 7-month pitching process. Sort of like each month there'd be another meeting, and then every meeting I would try to just come in with something new. Like I usually treat pitching like if you're on something like that, that's going to be a drawn out process where just kind of start doing whatever it is you would do if you were making the movie. So it would be, first it was like a reference reel of scenes that I felt like would be good touchstones for what should be in this. And then it was storyboarding sequences with storyboard artists that they work with, and then concept art, and just every meeting coming with something new that felt like if we were making the movie, this is how it would work.
From when you first got attached, like with the screenplay, with everything, to what everyone just watched tonight, how did it change along the way? Did you go through any like big revisions?
I mean, there were so many that it's hard to think now of exactly what happened. I think, it was nice. I saw Kevin last night, and we talked about how it's nice to look back on something that, you never feel like there's not some version out there that I wish we could go back to that, or we could have done that. Like it felt like it just kept getting better. And that is the one sort of thing about Marvel that John told me going in, which is like the way to approach it is, and the way Kevin is he just never stops trying to make it better. Even till very late in the process, we're putting in different lines, making editing trims until very recently. And so if you go in and you meet that with the same attitude of you just can't ever say we're done. You know what I mean? Like this script is done, this edit is done. You say this is good, and then there are ways to make it better. And if you always try to keep improving it, then it's a really fun process.
Marvel movies, as you just said, like Kevin likes to talk about plussing a movie.
Always be plussing.
Exactly. So I'm curious. So you're in the editing room, you have your cut. Everything's pretty good, but you know that it could be better. What did you guys actually do as like pluses, like in the last 6 months or last year, whatever it might be, that like really helped the movie?
I mean, so many things. Like it's such a long list. I think there's some fun just to talk about Kevin because he has such a good editing brain. A couple of those I snuck in just to make sure that the little girl. Well, this is a spoiler. But.
No, I was going to say because people are still filming. Let's just say that when something dramatic happens, it causes the audience to gasp.
I made sure we got the gasp, and that we weren't getting that in the first couple test screenings, and maybe that was because the effects weren't done on that sequence, or also just that one and one of the earlier moments that also hopefully got a gasp. I wasn't here in the vault. The editing rhythm of I think the way we first had that, the music was building up to it, and it landed like right on the one of where the music would go, and Kevin was like, no, you got to do that on the offbeat or not on beat, and do it a bit earlier to kind of help that sort of like that internal rhythm and make sure that it's a surprise. And we did that, and in both of those moments, getting the music right before the second gasp moment that shall not be named, they didn't work until the music worked, like until all of the things around it, and he had just such a good detailed brain for that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's all. I mean, there's a list of 200 things, but yeah.
What's funny is I think a lot of people forget about Kevin Feige and what he's done with Marvel, and this is just an example of why Marvel is Marvel.
He's very, very good. Yeah.
So I always talk to people about editing and first cuts and all that stuff. So how long did you have, like a way longer assembly cut?
No, well, the nice thing about this movie is our editors were on set, so we were cutting shot by shot as we went, which is so helpful for action sequences like that opening vault sequence, where it's so important to establish. It's such a complicated sequence of they're each going after a different one and really getting to land that. And so if you're cutting it as you go, we caught maybe 45 things over the course of the shoot that didn't turn into reshoots, where we could pick it up along our way and say, we need to go back to that. We need to put that in because you're watching it be assembled in front of you. I also don't shoot a ton of coverage, like the design of the scenes is what it is. So I think the first cut that I did going through the director's cut, I think was 2 hours and 5 minutes.
Yeah, the movie's like 2.6.
Okay, but without credit. Eventually, I think we probably came down about 11 minutes from there, but it was not this massive long cut, and there's not much on the floor. I mean, there's not, like, they were asking for deleted scenes the other day, and I was like, well, there's lines that we took out there, so there's not a heck of a lot of scenes that didn't go in the movie. I
guess they're going to stick with a gag reel then.
There's a good gag reel.
Yeah. I was going to say that's the bonus. What's the next thing I want? So one of the shots that I love, and tell me if this was done on purpose. And when I rewatched it yesterday, I love at the beginning of the film when Florence is in the hallway and she's kicking everyone's ass, and you see the shadows of everyone. And obviously, so did you specifically do that as a precursor for what was coming later?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to design this kind of like our version of a Bond opening or a Mission Impossible opening, but tailored to our movie, where it comes from a more emotional place, because obviously the movie functions more on an emotional level than a traditional action movie. And so Sonny Lee Sung-jin from Beef came in and had this idea for a sequence where it almost seems like a suicide at first, but then is actually just this disaffection and this jump off a roof. So it is this amazing stunt that Florence did, which was insane, but also it's an emotional stunt. And what makes that, to me, so impressive is that, you have to count on, you're in this close-up where she has to be truly emotional and in character and then pull out, and then in that same shot, she's going to step off of the second tallest building in the world. And, only with an actress like that. I was talking to her about it last night, that she didn't, the fear couldn't come in because she was in character, and I knew that if she was in character, she would step off because she's that committed as an actress. But then, so the rest of that sequence was, what's a twist we could do on, an old boy hallway sequence, and then something, just the idea of relating action to darkness and her being in this darker place, and I think Sonny's first idea was that the lights would go out and it would all be in this dark hallway, and you'd just see the gunshots, and then we realized that was just from Batman, from Matt Reeves' Batman, so we couldn't do that. And then I had this idea that maybe if we went overhead and you could do a thing where there was just one backlight and it was about the shadows, then again that's a way that maybe this isn't a good thing to say. I don't know that we're gonna. I mean, Tom Cruise is the greatest. I don't know that we're gonna beat Tom Cruise at just pure, the way they make those movies, because those guys, and how long they spend on it. And so it was always where can we win? Where can we do something that's different and be the best at a different thing? And how can we find a different twist on what these kind of action sequences are and make it more about character? And I don't mean that those movies don't have great characters or anything. I'm not trying to just where can we succeed,
How the hell did you get fighting a chicken on meth in a Marvel movie?
I think it was later, and I think maybe people weren't paying attention, and
just the word meth in a Marvel movie.
Well, to have meth chicken as a strip on your schedule board, is a strange. I don't know. I assumed someone would say no, and no one did.
So one of the things that I think the film does just so well is address mental health. and it is like a third rail with most movies that people like. It feels fake and forced, and like it's bullshit in so many things I've seen where I don't believe the characters. And the thing that I love about this is that we know these characters and we know the darkness they've been dealing with, and it's only because we know them from previous films that you can build off of that. And so talk a little bit about like how you wanted to portray what the characters were going through and make it feel genuine and make it like believable to the audience.
Yeah, I think it came from, I mean, that was sort of Sonny's real thesis on Beef that I wasn't sure would be borne out, was that these ideas about, emptiness or the void, because that was a concept that we dealt with in Beef, were not kind of niche issues anymore. Those were actually universal, and that you could make a broadly popular show that talked about that, and that wasn't a conflict, and you could have humor in that show, and you could have action in that show, and it worked, on the level that it worked. Obviously, the action is not this scale of action, and so it felt like, okay, if we could do it there, could we try doing something like that here? And it not because we were trying to jam that in there, but just because if you have a character like Robert Reynolds, if you talk to Paul Jenkins, I saw him last night, that it was always a parable for mental health. And he's so, he's a Superman whose kryptonite is the void, this other side. And so it was always going to be this thing that had to be resolved to some degree on an internal level. And so to really tell the right story to do that, you kind of have to get into those issues or it's not going to work. I mean, as plenty of people have pointed out on the internet, how are they supposed to beat that guy, in a normal superhero context? And so if it's going to be something different, then it almost felt like you had to go inward. So it started from there, as it just felt natural to the characters that were in the film. And that started before Sonny was working on it, before I was working on it. Eric Pearson and Brian Chapek could put the void in this incredibly interesting character into this movie. And then it became about how do we kind of bind those characters together and make them related to each other.
So David Harbour is awesome in this. I mean, obviously the whole cast is, I can give flowers to everybody, but David really is so good because he adds the levity and the way he screams. And like, it's so, talk a little bit about working with David to be that sort of, the humor to break up really heavy scenes.
I mean, that guy just loves to act. It's really fun to, and it's interesting because it's a big, Alexei is a big character, but it's not actually a big performance. Like when you need to do the scene under the bridge, I mean, that's such beautifully observed acting. That's not a guy who's just trying to chew scenery. What's fun with Alexei is that he's our one character that allows us to be a little bit more meta, because he as a character is invested in the hierarchy of superheroes and in that world, and would want, a Wheaties box and would want a movie based on his character. And so you get to kind of have some of that meta fun without the movie feeling like it's stepping outside of the story. And it always felt like the size of it and the fun of it came from character and not from, just reaching for jokes.
Something else that I love is often, and I'm sure all of you are going to identify this, when you're watching people talk or fight or whatever, they're on a sound stage, there's nobody behind them, and you feel like, what the fuck? And instead with Thunderbolts, and I commend you on, when Florence is bearing her heart out to David, it's on a street with all these people behind and cars moving, and it feels like you're there, like this is real life. And so talk about why that was important to you, and was it tough to pull off? And because you also do that when they're fighting, when the truck breaks through to go into the Avengers building and there's cars and all this stuff going on.
So that is a set, but Grace Yoon built a full-scale recreation of a block and a half of 45th Street in New York, like outside in Atlanta. And, it's this weird thing where, I mean, we really tried as much as we could to be on location in this movie. That's all in Utah, out in the middle of nowhere in southern Utah, on a road that we owned for 2.5 weeks. But, in this world, Avengers Tower doesn't exist, and it makes up half of that block. So to go to New York, where it would be so hard to do it, where the building isn't even there, and then you'd be cheating that, and the kind of things that we were doing, it just made more sense to build it. But and look, I know this just because I'm friends with a lot of the VFX artists and supervisors on the movie. they're really tired of people going out there and saying, we did it all real, we did it all in camera. It's like, I mean, you saw the credits. There's a ton of incredible visual effects artists who worked on this movie and did a great job. But it's this theory that Jake Morrison, our visual effects supervisor, like if you can get 60% of it in camera, you're just making everything look better. You're giving the visual effects artist a chance to win. Where, you know, that sequence, so right to her left down the street, that's extension. You know, the cars are real that are going behind them, and the next side of the street is real, but like past that, that's all extension that ILM did. But just making sure that what's behind their heads is real. You know, just so that in an emotional scene like that, you're not looking at edging or spill suppression or anything. And then the other thing that we did on this movie that was Jake's idea that it was so cool is this is going to get misinterpreted. I don't mean it. There's not a single green screen in the movie, or maybe we use a blue screen once. It's this thing they've been doing now with gray screen, where you just have these grays up, which means everything has to be rotoed, but it means you don't have any green spill on your set. And it means that you're basically picking like a gray screen or anything that's within the tonality of the set that you've built, so that sometimes if it's deep background, everything that's reflective, there's none of that kind of color that you're then taking out of it. Or like in the Penthouse, I mean, it's funny, it's like an old technology where that's just a translate. And then we replaced it, but it means all of the reflective surfaces, all of those reflections, you can just use them, as opposed to having to go in and replace all the green. So it's not that we built sets, but we would try to have this principle of, you know, you can with CG set extension, you can have a set as big as you want these days, but we tried instead to kind of, with grace, like scale down and actually make sort of smaller sets. So in that vault, that's all real. The whole thing, like the whole hallway, like that's a smaller set than is normally in a Marvel movie, but all of it is built. And so when you're shooting in there, the actors are in there. So it was like, let's scale everything down to what we can actually make. And then when we can, let's go out in the world and let's really shoot there.
I have a favor. Can you do meetings with a lot of directors in Hollywood and let them know what you did so they can copy you? Because I've seen so much crap, and this is not crap.
I definitely did not invent these ideas. I mean, you know,
I'm just saying, like, I commend you for putting these ideas into the movie.
I think it's just, look, it's a very, very lucky thing to get to work at this studio and work on a movie of this size and have these resources. And then I think it's just about like what you do with them, like what you put them towards, and they could go a lot of different directions. And they're great movies. It could take place all in space. You could make a whole armada of spaceships, or you could try to, you know, it's more scaled down, but, you know, if you can go out to the second tallest building in the world and actually shoot on the roof, I mean, that's a pretty special place to be.
I love, and I said to you when we were watching the end of the credits, I love the Thunderbolts theme. Like, I don't know what music cue that is that you had at the end of the credits. I want to make sure we shine a light on it. But like, this is the best Marvel soundtrack I've heard in a while. So what was that theme called? Who did the music? What do you want to tell?
So it's a group called Sunlux. They got nominated for an Oscar for Everything Ever All at Once. I've worked with them before. They're brilliant. That particular piece at the end is, I'll confess that I don't know the name on the soundtrack yet, but that's when Bucky comes in on the bike. That piece, which just, I mean, that moment is so good that they built. What we did with this score, and you can only do it if you have a composer that's really committed and open to this, because it's risky, because traditionally, film scores are made, you shoot your movie, you go into post, you edit it with temp music, a bunch of other scores that exist, you find what works, and it's a useful process to kind of know what works for a scene, and then you go to your composer and you try to make something like that, but it's very, very difficult to get away from that temp and to not make something that is in reference to it or feels often like a copy of it. And then for all you know, I mean, that piece of score that you're temping with got made as a copy of some other piece of score, and so it becomes like a copy of a copy of a copy. And the only way to get around that is we started making the score before we shot the movie. And they would be sending me things while we were on set. We wrapped the movie, I think, with 40 sketches, all fully stemmed out so that we could go into post, and we were editing with our own original score. And then they could obviously iterate on top of that and make it better and better. But that theme, like the main Thunderbolts theme, like we had a whole suite of music that I played for the actors at our first table read. And that's still the theme that you hear in the movie.
I don't. There's a few people that have done that for movies. I know that Daft Punk did that for Tron Legacy, and they were playing their demos and stuff.
Well, and Ludwig does that for the Nolan movie. I mean,
Yeah.
So it's not, again, I did not invent any of these ideas. This is just what we did.
So this looks fantastic in IMAX. How much of the movie is IMAX full screen? I think it's like 20-something minutes.
39 minutes.
My bad. Again, don't listen to me at all.
We did it. It was an interesting, the thing that Andrew Palermo, who shot this and is so good, that we talked about is just love the scale that IMAX brings. The only thing that we wanted to find a way around was this idea of having to change your camera system or change your lenses to do it, so that there's this optical shift. We wanted to shoot on anamorphic lenses and not have to go out of that for the IMAX sequences. So we came up with the system on the Alexa 35. This is the first Marvel movie ever finished entirely in 4K. So we went to that in the post-process. And then if you use Ultra Panatar 2 1.3x anamorphic lenses, those cover a native 1.90 aspect ratio. So that's just on our camera the whole time. And then it just became about deciding which sequences we really wanted to approach that way and frame for that, but we're not shifting our lens system. And so there's complete optical consistency through the film. And, there's a lot of different ways to use this technology that are so fun. But for us, I think both of us look at lenses as kind of that's like your canvas, or your brush. It was just, I want to change that in the middle of a movie. And so that was like this great way that we worked out with the guys here and did a lot of tests and made sure that it felt like it worked at this scale. And then we could just keep that consistent through the film. Was there any talk of like doing, and again, this is just a wild question, but any talk of doing more of the movie in full screen, or do you do it specifically for certain scenes where you feel like the dramatic impact is stronger? Yeah, I think, again, lots of different ways to approach it. To me, it's nice, there are certain sequences where you want it to feel like your film opens up. I feel like when they get out of that vault and you're in the desert, you want to feel like the movie is opening up. I think it's a nice kind of way to emphasize that. And there are times when it really feels like, especially when there's multi-levels to a scene, like in the, saving civilians, the void above, below, giving more context to the jump that Florence does in the beginning. There are things that you're getting for it that are really worth it. And I think there are other times when, I just care so much about framing, in certain more intimate scenes, I don't know that there is a real benefit to just having that aspect ratio sit out there like that. I think it's better to kind of be in the framing that you really picked for that moment and with the characters. And so we really spent a lot of time there was obviously editing the movie as a movie first, but then going in and just doing sessions of when we wanted to go in and out of it and how to make that work.
So I love, one of the key sequences is the four-way fight, which is in, the beginning. Obviously everyone has seen the movie, but that is a very well choreographed, well designed, well shot sequence that obviously took a while to put together. So talk a little bit about the genesis of figuring out how to frame that and putting the sequence together.
Yeah. I mean, it just is one of these things where you've got to be able to understand what's happening. And that means, sacrificing maybe a little bit of kineticism and not doing it handheld. And that was something Andrew really pushed for, that he wanted no handheld in that sequence.
Andrew, your DP.
The DP, yeah. And so what we did, just to make sure it would work, it was like there's a thing called stunt viz. There's all kinds of vizes. There's pre-viz and storyboards and stunt viz. Stunt viz is when the stunt people, Heidi Moneymaker, a wonderful stunt coordinator, go off and shoot sort of, on a GoPro or iPhone, like versions of the stunts that they give you and put different shots together. And so they started building the sequence and choreographing it coming off of the storyboards that Rico Alessandro did. And then what we did for that one, just because it was so important, is Andrew and I went into the stunt rehearsals and just shot it ourselves on iPhone and edited it ahead of time, just so that it wasn't kind of a reference. It was really, these are the shots, this is how it's going to cut together, this is what it's missing, because there's so many little story beats. And then once we actually shot the sequence, we kept adding things. It seems silly to have a character say, there you are, but it's important to remind the audience that that's Yelena's target. Like just really establishing who is whose target and making sure that you're grounded in that while watching all of that action and making sure that, okay, no one can fight someone who's not their target unless it's defensive for a moment to get away and then try to pivot to another target. Like those details, it essentially required basically filming it as a iPhone short before we got on set. And then the editors had that viz in Avid, and then we were basically just dropping in shots over the top of that until it had been reassembled with the actual movie.
How long does a sequence like that take to shoot?
Too long.
Is that all you, or is that all second unit? Is it a combination? How does something like that go?
I really wanted to shoot it. I was like, I want to shoot all of this, and then it was like, I can't shoot all of this. George Cottle, who's Nolan's longtime stunt coordinator, and he was our second unit director on this. We did a lot of it, and then we left certain things for second unit. And the nice thing is we were sort of shooting down the hall, as it were, so you could look at, and also having that edit on set, you could look at stuff. George will often send me little iPhone videos of what he's shooting, and then I'll make notes and go back and then drop it in. So I think maybe, but it was the first thing we did. And that set had been sitting there for a year because we got shut down by the strike. So the floors were really creaky. It was just like a very strange way to start a shoot with like little piece by piece action. But the narrative of it is so important that it felt like we had to do that, at least a lot of it first unit to start.
So I would really like it if everyone could sort of like put their phones down real quick so I could ask a few other questions. I just want to make sure no one's going to film. Thank you. I would really appreciate it. I really want to talk about the after the credit scenes. So, thank you. If anyone's like still filming, just tap that person and be like, please put your phone down. So the first after the credit scene, was that always going to be that scene?
We had a bunch of different Alexei ideas. I think the first one I had was I wanted to do the day that Mindy pooped at the sock, like do it as was that Eric's idea? I'm sorry if it's Eric's idea, then he deserves all the credit. Like a VHS video of Alexei yelling at the ref when the poop happened. But we ran into this thing where, in Black Widow, he doesn't have an accent. There's this kind of funny inconsistency where Alexei can definitely speak perfect English because he did at the beginning of Black Widow, but now has this accent, and the accent is amazing. You don't want to get rid of the accent, but it would have been very strange to return this audience who may or may not have seen Black Widow recently to a time when he spoke perfect English in Ohio, so it felt like we couldn't do that, but something with him, and so
that really would have been. I would have laughed my ass off.
Maybe on the next, it's still it exists in canon. So if we film it sometime, then yeah.
So how did you end up with the supermarket scene?
It was just an idea. I don't know. It just seemed fun. It felt like a way, again, because you're in the meta, and also you just want to spend some time. It's such the movie goes through these big tonal shifts that hopefully hold together for an audience, but because it all has to end on the street with confronting Val, and then there's this very, Kevin's so good at these things, this kind of twist flip, and you throw people into the credits, that you just wanted something that would let people just have some fun with these characters again, and remember that was a part of the movie as well, and a corner of it. And we also did that credit sequence leading up to it again to sort of acknowledge that we know that this is not necessarily the most comfortable fit in terms of what they're being announced as, and have some fun with kind of using that news narrative to bring you along to a place where you're like, oh, maybe this could work.
Now I understand the cereal boxes that have been out for so long.
That was not the marketing on this movie, Assad and everyone at Disney. I mean, they did not tell me about that. So I just walked into the meeting and they had that standee, that giant one. I was like, oh, you guys are really you're going for it, huh?
Did you film that after the credit scene during the regular shoot?
No, that's an additional. Because we felt like, we were trying to be scrappy coming out of the strike, and it just felt like, let's get the movie right, and not use our resources on post-credit scenes, and then see what the movie is, and then see what it needs, and then try to tailor those to what it's looking for.
Speaking of the second after the credit scene,
yes.
Which is, I don't want to use, I was about to make a pun and I didn't want to do that. It's really good. You know what I was going to say? But so it's also a pretty big sequence, which it jumps ahead. It's a lot of dialogue. It's very funny. And it also brings the audience a little bit of shock and awe. So when did that get filmed? And was that you? Was that let's talk about this.
That got filmed a month ago, I think.
Wow.
I was there. I did not direct it. That comes from the set of a movie that is going into production right now. So.
Got it. I'm so it was like a pre-shoot, if you will.
Yeah.
Got it. What was your take on that sequence after? I mean, because it's a pretty good tease for the future.
Yeah, I think it's fun to. Well, Florence said it was like being dropped off at school by your parent, and then you have to go, hang out with the new kids. And I was there, but I had to wave goodbye. And but to watch them on that set, and it is a different tone than our movie, and it should be, And I think that once you do that announcement, and I think it's just fun to watch them in that context and imagine where that could go, I guess.
Yes, I'm counting the days towards other things.
Yeah.
I am very confident that once this movie comes out this weekend and fans see your work in the Marvel Universe, they will want more. I know you are still promoting this movie, and I know that you can't even think about it, but I'm still going to ask you, did you have a good enough time that if they ask you to do another one, you'd be like, yeah, I want to play in the sandbox again?
I had a great time. It was such a rewarding experience. Grace would always talk about it she was like, we're going to grad school. We're going to learn so much, and I do feel like I learned so much. And I also think, this cast, if you could work with these people again, you would do that in any context, no matter where it was. I don't know, but given what I just said, I don't know what that would mean in terms of,
Sure.
It's not, you don't just do number two. It doesn't really,
No, listen, I'm just saying that I really thought you did such a great job with this material, and I would really hope that Feige and everyone, and also the reviews and Rotten, you know what I mean? I want you doing another Marvel movie if that's something that you want to do.
I would happily do that, but I only mean to say that I think like everyone else, it's going to be fun to sort of sit back and watch where this goes, and then think about what would make sense in the future if that's something that happens.
I'm running out of time. This might be my last question. He does have a plane to catch. I love the end credits with the way that it has all the, Not My Avengers, Nope, and all the magazine covers. So this is two parts. One, where'd that idea come from? And two, how dare you not use Collider as one of the outlets saying Not My Avengers?
Well, it's not a movie of the new Avengers, it's the actual new Avengers, So,
yeah, no, I'm teasing. There's a lot of great headlines in there. The newspaper stuff is fantastic because, that you're almost getting a jump on headlines that are going to be written after this movie comes out.
Does everyone have their phones down? This is not going to get spoiled. Okay, because I do think it's interesting. I think that when we were making the movie, and I had this suite, and it really is basically the same piece of music, and I was editing in my head. I was like, yeah, we're going to go to that. She's going to announce it. Yelena will walk up. It's building up, and then push in on a close-up of her face, and then we're going to hit the credits. She's going to say it, and everyone's going to cheer, and that didn't happen. People didn't cheer when she announced it. They weren't. It was interesting in those early test screenings, and so it was like, okay, this is and you're trying to sort of figure out where that comes from, and if it's just sort of about we're coming out of this very emotional place and it's a quick left turn, or is it? And I think what we found from those discussions, it's a little really, are you sure? And so it felt like not only did we need more, we had a whole different credit sequence that we were working on. We were doing a guinea pig going through a bunch of void rooms, because people do ask about the guinea pig. I wanted to tie that up, but Brian at some point he was like, I think we need the real estate. We need to use the credit sequence as narrative, both sort of just to give people time to sit with this, and also to kind of bring them along on a progression where it is this very, it's all in more kind of legacy media, but this very internet reaction of at first like, oh, come on, and then over the course of, so it's like we know that we're aware that it's not a perfect fit, so people feel kind of like understood in that, and then also try to bring them to a place as the headlines kind of turn a bit and it gets a little bit more classic to where you might, maybe you're into it, maybe you're not into it, but you could accept it or you understand. It just felt like we could do that, and it was fun last night. I mean, obviously premiere audiences, that's a whole other thing, but like it was the first time we got applause on the the announcement, and then the page turn like really landed, which was fun to see.
I could ask 1,000 other questions, but he really does have a plane to catch in like a little over an hour. So I'm just going to say, if everyone could stay seated, it would be great, because I also have 2 things I'm giving away to 2 of you, and they're pretty cool. But ladies and gentlemen, Jake Schreier.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And sorry I would answer more questions.
Fly safe, sir.